Thanks. My name's Michael, I'm an addict.
Hi, Michael.
While that reading was going on, I got a really strong urge to get up and run out of the room and just disappear, because I don't like doing chairs. I've been around a long time, I've done a lot of chairs, I've done main chairs on stage, and I hate doing them. It's not got any better for me, I'll be honest about that. That in itself is an amend to me, because I'm not going to lie. I've been around for a long time, 35 years. So, you know, I've seen people come in really young, and I've actually done more using in my using career than they've actually been around in the world. And so the way that I am about men's these days is very different to when I first got clean. I got clean in the 80s, and the drugs I was using was heroin mainly. That was what I was into, and anything that knocked me out, because I didn't really want to be part of this world. And so a lot of my drug using was involving sort of stealing, dishonesty, robbery, hanging out with similar people like me, sort of frontline addicts. I didn't look like I look now. I looked a bit more like Charles Manson when I was using. On crutches, they used to call me Sparky. That was my name, because I was always like that, really quick, trying to get to the dealers. But so, you know, a lot of my men's were with like-minded people, and we were going out every day. It was hustling, it was shoplifting, it was burglaries, it was whatever we could do. So when it got to me getting to this step in recovery, it was a strange time, because a lot of the people I needed to make amends to had either died, because it was my family. And that was tricky, because a lot of my family members were also addicts. I grew up in a family of addiction and alcoholism. So it was very difficult to separate what harm I'd caused them and what harm they'd caused me. And so I had to sort of deal with that in my Step 8 list. I was asked to write a Step 8 and talk about the harms that I'd actually caused other people. And I couldn't really do that properly until I'd actually dealt with what had been done to me in my childhood. So once I did the childhood, what was done to me, then I felt able to go on to what I'd done to others. So it was really important for me, because Step 9 doesn't just happen, it happens after all the other steps, and it's exactly in the right place, because if you try and do this early on, you usually make a mess of things. And I can say that from experience, because I made some early amends. I got clean, and like it said in the reading, this step helps you with the guilt, and I was full of guilt. I'm a recovering Catholic. And I say that because I grew up in a very sort of Irish Catholic family, church, all that sort of stuff. And there was loads of stuff that I went through as a kid, and it was all interplayed with religion, and there was abuse, and all sorts of stuff went down. And so for me, it was really important that I sort of tried to sort of make amends very quickly. I was carrying this weight of guilt. And so I remember going to meetings and seeing people I'd used with in meetings, and I'd just go up to them and say, "I'm so sorry, I burgled you, and I nicked this and I nicked that." And people would just say F off. They just didn't want to know. But I was so burdened with this feeling. And I remember my sponsor at the time, he said to me, just take it easy. And there was one particular amend I made. I was about 6 months clean, and I'll never forget it. I stole a pen from an old friend of mine. It was a quite an expensive pen, Mont Blanc, and it cost a lot, and I nicked it and sold it for a £10 bag of gear. And in recovery, I went and told her that I'd stolen this pen, and she blamed all these other people for doing it, but she never blamed me, because she thought I was a close friend. And I told her I'd stolen it, and then she said to me, "No, that was the only thing I had of my dead father that I'd left." And it really hit me. She hasn't spoken to me since, and that's 35 years ago. But it's that sort of, I was so eager to try and get rid of this, I hadn't really worked out what this might do, because there's a little bit in the Step 9, except when to do would harm them or others. And I realised in that, and I've never forgotten that, how we need to really be careful about what we say to people, and really go through Step 8 lists with a sponsor, so that we can work out whether we make direct amends, indirect amends, or perhaps just change our behaviour so that we act differently in society. And so that was my beginning of recovery amends, and how it got really heavy for me. And then I think I changed sponsors, and I started to look at the steps again, And the sponsor I had the second time around, he came from a very sort of spiritual place, and he was telling me the very fact that I was working the programme, going to meetings, being of service, was the amend to myself. And you know, there was this whole thing in the early days around whether you ever put yourself on the step 8 list. And some people said, if you put yourself on the list, you're being selfish and self-centred. And some people said, I deserve to be on the list because I harmed myself so badly, as it says in the literature. I don't think it really matters one way or the other. I think as long as you're open and willing to make amends, things change. You know, it's, as we say in NA, it's an inside job. And I think the act of actually doing something on the outside has an impact on the inside, and we start to feel differently about ourselves. So as I've gone on in recovery, I've come up against a few people that I used with, where I have taken things, treated them badly. One of the big things I needed to make amends for in the rooms was actually sharing some really heavy gear with people and then disappearing and not telling people what's happened. And I now realise how emotionally abusive that was to people, because it's like dumping something really heavy and then disappearing, and they're just left with it. And so for me it's about, and I have this with people that I sponsor, if they sort of share something with me and then I don't speak to them for a month, and I'll say to them, well, you know, what happened with that thing? I thought it was life or death. You were going to use, you were doing this. And oh no, it's fine, it's great. Got through that. I've got a new drama now, and I'll say I'm still on the old one, for God's sake. Do you know what I mean? So it's that sort of behaviour, and I think that's part of being an addict, and just partly of not thinking about how we impact on other people. And for me, recovery's given me the ability and the power to actually think about how I am with others. I suppose developing empathy, you know, and that's been my process in working the other steps before 8 and 9, because I think without the empathy, we can't really understand how our behaviour might have affected someone else. Because I don't know about anyone else, but I was always full of, you shouldn't have treated me like this, you've done this to me. So I was so full of that sort of self-righteous victimhood, but never really thought in my life about how that might have been to other people when I did the same things. So for me, it's been a sort of a gradual sort of rude awakening from the beginning of working the steps to having a more measured sort of understanding of step 9 and 8, really, because you can't do step 9 without the 8. I think for me, some of the biggest amends I've made and I've needed to make were to dead people from my family. My mum was a using addict, and she died in the 80s, and she died penniless with nothing in a council block, sold all her furniture, and I felt terribly guilty because I was a son and I thought I was supposed to look after her. So there was all that stuff that I sort of had to make amends to myself about. But there was also the fact that she'd never been a mother. She walked out when I was 5 and just left me. I didn't have a dad. So there was all that sort of gear that I had to sort of work out. And the sponsor at the time, he suggested that I start writing letters to her. She'd been cremated. And I wrote this one letter. And I wouldn't say it was looking at my part, taking, you know, responsibility for what I'd done. It was just so full of resentment and anger. And I just needed to write this letter, and it was about what was being done to me in my early years by her. And I did this letter, and I went to the cemetery and read it out. Ooh, I can feel it now. But it was so powerful, because what I realised afterwards was it was the sort of pain that kept me going for years. I'd used on this pain. It was like the cement that keeps the bricks of a house together. And without it, I felt I was going to fall apart, and it was so painful. Yeah, as you can see, it still touches me now. I remember going to a meeting. I arranged to meet a close friend at a meeting in the afternoon. So I went in the morning to the cemetery, did the letter, and got all this stuff out of my system. Went to the meeting, and I shared about it. And I remember somebody cross-shared and said, "You've done it wrong. You should be taking responsibility for yourself." And I thought, I'm never going to talk to you again. I was sharing a meeting with you are. I thought, you're off the Christmas list. and you know, and then and I phoned my sponsor and I told him all what was happening that day, and he said, "You've done exactly the right thing. You need to get," he said, "you've got to take the cork out of the bottle before you get to what's in the bottle." And he said, "The anger is the cork. You let it go and all the stuff's going to start fizzing out." And he was absolutely right. And I wrote 5 letters to my mum. I'm going to go again. But each one of them sort of took me closer to some forgiveness, some sense of, what's the word? Just a reconciliation. Like we felt together. And now when I think about my mum, I think of it with great compassion and love, and I think she was just an untreated addict. Yeah, I think that was one of the big amends in my whole recovery, that one to my mum. And there's been other ones like that I've done. I needed to do one to my gran because she was my main carer up until I was 11, and then she died. And I went to the cemetery where she was buried and sat down and spent some time with her. And gosh, it's always so painful, this stuff. I always think, I've got enough clean time and I've talked about this so much. I've done therapy and all that, and I think it's not going to touch me. But the wounds are always there. I don't think things really ever get taken away. What happens, they just lose their power. And when you start talking about them, they come back. So I talked to my gran. I've done various amends like that with my family members. And they've all helped me, and this is my big belief around Step 8 and 9, is they help me heal the rifts in me. Because it's like sort of growing up as the person I was and the addict that I became, it's like you become this sort of patchwork personality. You become somebody who's just made up of different bits, and you try to keep all the bits apart. You don't want them to join up, because when they join up, it hurts. And so, a lot of my drug using was about avoiding pain. And so a lot of my resistance around some of this stuff was about keeping myself away from pain, which is why I'm so glad Step 8 and 9 is where it is. Because if it was in the beginning, I wouldn't be here. I probably would have topped myself. But I don't want to talk too much about sort of those physical things that I did to make amends. I want to talk about changes of behaviour, because I think this is really important, because we can do this from the very beginning of recovery. For me, coming to meetings, it's amazing. We sit in this room, we have order, biscuits, tea, literature put out, people know their roles and responsibilities. This isn't what my using was like. My using was in a council flat if I was lucky, or a squat, and people running for the kitchen, or who's got the tourniquet, who's got the spoon, for fuck's sake. Sorry. But it was like that. So it wasn't like this. This for me is like the biggest amend. And so for me, I've been very focused on changing my behaviour. If people ask me to do chairs, I do my best to sort of go out and say yes. And I live in London, and I come down here to do a chair. And for me, this is about going to any length and making sure that I'm carrying the message. And even though it's Step 9, it's also part of Step 12. And it's also helping me remember where I come from. I don't want to go back to that place. And there's lots of stuff around, sponsorship. I've got a great sponsor. I've had a few sponsors in my time, and I've got a great one now. And also sponsoring people. I have a real big belief in sponsorship, in terms of, I grew up without a dad. So for me, one of the big amends for me is actually being there for other men and allowing other men to be there for me. It sort of heals that sort of rift around not having a dad around and not having that male role model. And so that's been really important. But just being there for people, and when I make a commitment to be somewhere, I am there. I don't let people down. I usually turn up early and get a resentment because they're late. But I'm always there just the same. But I don't know what time it is. How long have we got in?
Long.
Okay. So I'll make it a bit more current around amends. And this is where I'm at really with my amends these days. And in 2019, I had a goddaughter who died in 2019. She died of cancer. And she left 3 kids. And her husband, who's a boozer, disappeared. When she was diagnosed with cancer, he left and left her with the 3 kids. And so she was going through all of her chemotherapy treatment, which wasn't successful. And then she was in a hospice and she died. And I'm going to go again in a minute. But I was there with her. And but I made her a promise that I'd be there for the kids. So for the last 5 years, I've been a sort of part-time father to these kids. The dad's come back because suddenly he's got a place that he can say, this is my house and whatever, and he's come back and he's calling the shots. He hates me, hates the fact that I do all the things that he failed to do. So I have some compassion for him because it's not his fault, he's just a messed up guy. He's a roofer and he's a drinker and he's always falling off roofs. So you can see the sort of guy he is. And he's got 3 kids and he doesn't even think about it. I mean, the kids are growing up now, so they don't need me so much. But, you know, for me, it's been a really important amends to make as a sort of semi-parent, to be there for someone and be there for his kids and uphold the promise that I gave to my goddaughter before she died. And also, and this is really important, I'm making an amends. I'm going to go again. It's making an amends to me. Because I'm actually looking after the kids and I never got looked after. So it's making amends to the kid that I was. And so that happened in 2019, the same year an old partner of mine died that I've been seeing on off for years, and they died, and it was a big time for me. And then we had the pandemic. And then over the last few years, I've had a number of other bereavements and deaths, and I've done my best to be there. I had a sponsee that died last year, September, and I went to see him in hospital before he died. And again, it's just about turning up for these really difficult things. I don't like it, but I need to do it. It's really important not to turn away from it. And recently, a couple of weeks ago, an old friend of mine, she was in her 80s. I mean, I'm nearly 70, so she was in her 80s. I met her when I was in early recovery, and she got cancer and died. But before she died, she was asking for me, so I went to the hospice, and I was there with her when she died. And sort of, it's just one of those things, just being there for people and doing all the things that I couldn't do. My mother died on her own. So, when my friend died recently, I felt that being there for my friend was like being there for my mum. It was like trying to say, I'm there for you. It's a different woman, but the sentiment and the feeling and wanting to do something for someone like that was so important for me, to heal something for me. I went to the funeral. It was a humanist funeral in a wood in Sussex. It was really lovely. And, this might not make a lot of sense to people that are new to this programme, but, I'm just giving you little snapshots of my process and how I was. I wasn't like this in the beginning. In the beginning, I was just mad and running around meetings. I had 10 commitments in a week, and I was like a pinball going all over London, going so fast I didn't have to stop and feel. And now I can meditate and slow down and take it easy and process things and share with people and all the things that I couldn't do in the beginning. And for me, it's a slow and gentle process. It's not a quick fix. I know for some people they want a quick fix, and that's fine. But for me, thought I wanted a quick fix, like a drug. I saw recovery. It's like if I jack up the steps, I'll be fixed. And what I've realised is actually you need to. It's like I said to Ian earlier. It's like pouring water onto sun-baked earth. It takes a long time for the water to get through the soil and sink down and really get into the whole body. And for me, that's what the amend and sticking with the amends is about. And it's not just about the step 9, it's also about step 6 and 7, because, if you continue to do the same things that you were doing and you're using and you haven't made changes, what's the point of making amends? So you have to really, clear out some of the messiness of your life and work out what I can change, what I can't change, what I can accept, what I can't accept. before you do the amends. And you need to do the amends before you move on to step 10, because if you've actually still got all this other gear going on, how can you start to focus on the day? And if you don't keep stuff cleared out from the day, how can you move on to step 11, where it's about doing a little bit of washing up and house cleaning, and then you open the windows and let the higher power in to connect with you. You know, it's all very simple when you think about it, but all the steps are very linked, and when you're working step 1, you're also working step 12. You know, there's all sorts of stuff. So I don't really have too much to say, except, you know, if there's anyone new here, please stick around. I mean, it's up to you really, it's your decision. But, you know, I just think this is an incredible program. And I suppose for me, I was one of those people that wasn't quite sure about it, because I've got things about religion and you know, that was an off-putter for me. But I thought, I really want this, so I'll tolerate whatever's going on and just see if I can work with it. And here I am 35 years later. So I hope someone's got something out of this, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.